Hi, everybody. Welcome to our fourth and last dialogue in this series on family diplomacy dialogues on security. As you might recall, and I'll be letting people in gradually here, but as you might recall, the this dialogue is focused on the impacts of the internet on families. And so I'm very happy to have three presenters, three speakers with us to give us some background to inform our dialogue. And then we're going to launch into discussion. So I'm going to briefly introduce our speakers. So Denise and Bethany, I think some of you know Denise and Bethany because they have worked with us in the past couple of years, helping to inform our trainings with regards to family diplomacy. They join us from Arizona State University. They are a mom and a daughter, and they are um, uh, both specialists in family processes. So um, I'm going to briefly talk about mom first. Denise Bodman is a lecturer and a teaching professor at the T. Denny Stanford School of Social and Family Dynamics at Arizona State University. Her scholarly interests are parenting and family processes and healthy family and human development, particularly positive psychology, such as kindness, hope, and forgiveness. Bethany, her daughter, is likewise a teaching professor, but also the director of the online graduate program in family and human development at the same school, the Stanford School at Arizona State University. Her teaching interests are in statistics, research methods, parenting, and human development. And so she's likewise interested in positive psychology, family processes, personal and family narratives. Both of them have written a book recently. In fact, Denise and Bethany, it would be great if you were willing to share the book in the Zoom chat on families, and so they will be speaking first for about 15 minutes to provide us some perspective. And then we're going to hear from Mark Griffiths, who is joining us from the United Kingdom. Mark is hold on a second. I had the information in front of me, but um, Mark is a chartered psychologist and director of the International Gaming Research Unit um, at uh, Mark, remind me of your university.
Nottingham Trent University. I put all my information about me in the chat, Paul. I don't know
Great.
whether you got that.
Perfect. Yep. I have not because I've been paying attention to
Okay.
it here, but just to introduce you guys, he teaches in the areas related to abnormal social and health psychology, with particular interests in behavioral addictions, so gambling addictions, video game addictions, internet addictions, sex, exercise, and work addictions. And he'll be talking with us the about these about addictions and addictions to the internet in particular. So without further ado, Denise and Bethany.
Hi, everybody. How are you doing? It's really good to see some of you. I'm scrolling through your faces and I'm saying, okay, I know some of these people, so I don't feel quite so uncomfortable at 7 o'clock in the morning here in Arizona. Um, so I am going to, I was asked to speak on the internet and cell phones and essentially technology and how that influences families and the community and what kind of impact it has on us. So I need to tell you that when Paul first asked us to do this, I was completing a separate book project on infancy and infant development within the family. And I was working specifically on a section on screens and media and internet and how that influences infant development. So one of the things that I saw is that I was reading about was technoference. And technoference is, that's the next slide, Bethany. There you go. Technoference is a parent's use of technological devices that interferes with or interrupts everyday normal family relations and interactions, including, but not limited to face-to-face conversations, meal times, leisurely time together. Technological devices include any technological devices that distracts parental attention from their grandchildren, such as cell phones, smartphones, tablets. They exclude watching television. Now, I think it covers more than just parents, though. I think technoference is just part of our everyday interactions, that it involves family, friends, and coworker use. So our next slide. There we go. I say this is technoference. So as I sat down and put this presentation together, my thoughts and the story ended up taking a different direction, especially as I thought about things that I teach. Human beings are social animals. This is probably necessary for survival, but when survival is no longer an issue, is no longer the primary goal, out of maybe emotional support, physical support, whatever reason, human beings and our human brains crave social interaction. There was a researcher named Abraham Maslow. He was more of a theorist, I would say, than a researcher. But he believed that all human beings have this hierarchy of needs, and each step has to be met before we can consider the next step. So, for example, I used to work in the school system when I was a speech pathologist, and I remember helping a child who had a problem making his R sounds. And essentially what we're doing is trying to help the child make R sounds so they can have good self-esteem. And as I was talking to this child, I discovered that the previous night, his mother had a big argument with her boyfriend, and the police had to be called, and the boyfriend came back and burnt the house down, and they were living out of a car. And I was thinking, here I am trying to help him with his R's, and he doesn't even have a place to live. He doesn't have food on the table. Physiological needs are basic needs. And once we have food and once we have water, then we can worry about being safe and secure. And then we can work on our relationships. Now, I think family actually crosses all of these steps. But it does start making you think how important our social life is and our social needs are. Our drive to connect with other people and form relationships isn't just some kind of casual coincidence. It's a basic human need that's essential for health and wellness. So this took me to the findings that are relatively recent, that our world is lonely. And it's getting lonelier. The pandemic, I think, highlighted something that was happening even before lockdowns, and it continues today, long after lockdowns have stopped. Loneliness is considered to be in the US at epidemic levels. So much so that our Surgeon General has, he travels around the country lecturing on loneliness and trying to address the problem. Because loneliness is also related to physical and mental health. It results in early death, and it affects all of us at different ages and in different countries. For example, here are the top 10 most lonely countries in the world as measured by various loneliness scales. So we've got Brazil, Turkey, India, Saudi Arabia, Italy, South Africa, Malaysia, South Korea, Chile, and Peru. So you look at this, and like in Brazil, 50% of the population identify as lonely. 28% don't, but 50% do. Now, what about the least lonely? Oh, by the way, the global average is at the bottom of this list. Underneath the global average, so less feel lonely, is Canada. And underneath that is the United States. So if you're wondering where the United States is, we're not as high on the loneliness scale as some of these other countries. Now we look at the least lonely countries. Hungary, Belgium, Spain, Germany, China, Sweden, Russia, Poland, Japan, the Netherlands. So those countries, people tend to identify as less lonely. Now, what about males and females? Is there a difference between males and females? Apparently not. It seems that loneliness affects men just as much as it affects women. It affects it about equally across the scale. What about age? What do you guys think what do you think would be the loneliest age group?
After 30, 40, between 30 years and 40 years.
Between the 30s and 40s. Other thoughts?
I say higher, 60 to 80 if I
60 and 80, which would seem like it, right?
Mhm.
Okay, let's take a look. 18 to 24. And the old people, the me's of the world, they identify as less lonely than the 18 to 24 and 25 to 34 group. So I kind of found that interesting, especially since we have a loneliness problem among the people who are most connected in history. The most connected generation. The internet has totally changed our lives. Now, my grandchildren are what are called digital natives or tech natives. They have no concept of dictionaries, no concept of encyclopedias, snail mail, phones connected to the wall. They live in the world of a digital world. They play digital games. They have classes online. My granddaughter, I used to have a cell phone, but I quit using one probably about 10 years ago. And my granddaughter, who is 9, will tell me, she'll take out a cell phone. She says, okay, Grandma, this is how you swipe. This is how you do this. They're using this stuff. And when we look at the social media platforms that people use, Instagram is huge. Snapchat, Facebook is so boomer, my age group. Twitter, which now is X. So we are our young people are very connected. But what does this mean? First, I think we need to look, excuse me, historically. Humans have always worried about new technologies and inventions. They worried that paper and writing things down would lead to forgetfulness. That's why Socrates and Plato never wrote anything. They called writing a step backwards in truth. They were worried about it. Back in the 1800s, trains, people were worried about trains and they protested trains because they were afraid that going 30 miles an hour would rip you apart and suffocate you. That phones would electrocute you and lead women to gossip. And I remember television, and people just thought television was just destroying mankind. It was a huge topic of television and violence and things like that here in the United States. So this isn't anything new. We shouldn't be surprised about our fears related to the internet. People are worried that online access takes away from face-to-face time. We call that social displacement. But interesting to me, studies appear to show that this is not the case. In one study, for example, people were asked to keep a diary of how they spent their time with access to social media and without. They found that when people were disconnected from social media, they did spend more time doing chores, cleaning, even browsing the internet. They just weren't allowed to go on social media. But they didn't increase their time socializing with each other, with the most important people in their lives. Face to face, they didn't spend more time. In fact, the internet can help family members and friends stay in contact and assist each other and plan activities. Bethany, talk about Ty and his use of the phone.
Well, it's interesting when you think about when you actually see this stuff in use and you start understanding how, and we're going to talk about this, the positives and the negatives and the strengths and the challenges of social media, of phone use. I have monitoring programs on all my kids' phones and they all know it. So I can see, I have an idea of what they're doing. I can make sure they have a certain amount of time allotted to different types of activities. My oldest son, who's 16, the largest chunk of time he spends on his phone is reading. And it's his Kindle, his books. And so, to look at what we're replacing our time with when they have digital devices and it's not necessarily things that are different from in person. His next highest use on his phone would be an app that they use to discuss marching band things. And so, but he'll spend hours on it. And so, but it's required through his school. So here's a challenge too, is parents trying to wrestle with the use of the digital things in their lives when he needs to be able to find reminders and notes about when they're meeting and what they're going to do at their next meeting, but yet it also turns into other conversations. And so it's very challenging to balance those things. We'll talk about that again in the future, but those are definitely his top two, is reading and his school groups.
And so it's kind of interesting because we kind of think that being on the internet is taking time away from face-to-face activity. Although one researcher believes that face-to-face activity, that the causality is in the wrong order, that its face-to-face activity has decreased, that parents are keeping kids away from other kids the way that they were allowed to in the past. And as a result, parents limiting their children's time with others turns them to online to try to meet those needs of connection. So research suggests that these new technologies are a blessing and a curse. They provide risks and they provide benefits. In other words, the internet and all of its appendages, phones, the tablets, social media, are tools. That's all they are. And how we use these tools determines the effect on us and our families and our communities. Another important finding was parent perception of social media and family communication is just as important as the actual impact of social media. And if parents see social media as and the internet as something useful and something that can be managed appropriately without interfering with family dynamics, then communication in the family remains positive. And so these researchers who looked at this study suggested that we need to help parents and family understand that these technologies can be beneficial and they can be managed. Now, as I said, this presentation for me took an unexpected turn. We are seeing an increase in loneliness, especially among certain groups, including youth, and some subgroups, for example, widows. We understand that people who are connected through family, religion, and community, they live longer, they live healthier, they live happier lives. The digital world can be a tool, though, in bringing people together, in informing us, in widening our horizons, and entertaining us. So if it's used wisely, if we use that tool correctly, it can benefit our families and communities. But this means doing things like setting strict limits and taking safety precautions, making sure that meaning and holding on to important value remains at the core of our families and communities. And as some have said, we need to invest in people, not devices. Bethany? Bethany?
I'm figuring out the clicking. It's not clicking for me now.
And just so you guys know, you're at about 15 minutes, but if you're, I'm
We're at the very end.
Look
Great.
how fast I'm giving you all the things. Just remember these forever. And so some of these are just quick tips on what we can do, I think, to balance out that good versus the bad, the challenges. And a lot of these are individual things and family things to remember and to apply to make sure you have screen-free zones or times. That doesn't necessarily need to be the same place, but maybe it's a time. Talk about your guidelines. Make sure this is something that you do together with a family. The more you can make it this positive kind of a team conversation and atmosphere, again, as we saw before with research, the better and more likely we can make it a positive thing in our lives rather than a battle, as often anyway. Get outside, find other ways to spend time rather than telling people what not to do. Look for alternatives and make those things to do, and that tends to work better. Talk with people, and then I think importantly, we need to look beyond just individuals and look at the community level. And this issue of loneliness is something that needs to be addressed more broadly. And so we need to look for opportunities to see how we can support stable marriages, stable relationships, stable families. We need to find safe places for community gathering, because that's really important. And if we don't have, as we saw, that social media can replace things that we're already missing. So let's find those ways to gather, find ways to address social support, especially in some of these populations that particularly need it. And these are ways that we can help start using these tools in combination with alternatives that can support the community and our families.
When I was in China, I taught over at the University of Sichuan in China, and it was amazing. It was like every Friday night, there was, or maybe it was Thursday night, but there was a big gathering at the heart of the city where everybody would come in, people would exercise together, they had all different sorts of groups doing different things, and you felt so connected. And I wondered why in the United States, we don't use our school playgrounds to do the same thing once a month, once a week, where people can come together and connect. Anyways, that's, I'm not sure that took the direction that you wanted, Paul, but it's kind of where it led me to.
This was awesome. I think in part because I think you're going to provide in some sense a different perspective than from what Mark is going to provide, and that's what I thought you would do, which is great. Mark is more of a specialist on addictions here, and is going to give us a different perspective. So Mark will be speaking for about 10 minutes, and then we're going to open up for discussion. I just want to reiterate to all of you, please engage with each other in the Zoom chat, but also post questions and comments, because we'll be getting to you and I'll be calling on you for your perspectives when Mark is done. Mark.
Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, that's excellent. Okay, so I've got 10 minutes. If you heard me speak before, I speak at 1 of 3 speeds, which is fast, very fast on amphetamines. This will be an amphetamine-fueled version because I've got 10 minutes. What I'm going to do very briefly is talk about questions and definitions of addiction, because I can guarantee every one of us in this webinar right now will have a different definition of what addiction is, and I'm going to tell you what mine is. I'll briefly talk about technological addictions, talk about some of the generic risk factors in facilitating online addictions, talk briefly about some of the most recent research looking at prevalence of different types of online addiction, and then wrap it up with some conclusions. Okay, for me, I've been studying in the area of behavioral addiction for 37 years now. I was actually the very first person in the world to publish a paper on internet addiction back in 1996. One of the questions I've always asked myself, well, what is addiction? And then the next question, if we apply it to internet addiction, well, does internet addiction exist, depending on what our definition of addiction is? And if internet addiction does exist, well, what are people actually addicted to? Now, it wasn't until 1988, which is actually after I started researching in this area, that there was what I call the first all-encompassing definition of what addiction is, published in the Annual Review of Psychology way back in 1988. And that said that addictive behavior is a repetitive habit pattern that increases the risk of disease and/or associated personal and social problems, often experienced subjectively as a loss of control. These habit patterns are typically characterized by immediate gratification, that's the short-term reward, often coupled with delayed deleterious effects, the long-term costs. Attempts to actually change an addictive behavior, either via treatment or by self-initiation, are typically marked by high relapse rates. The reason I like this definition, it doesn't mention there at all the ingestion of a psychoactive substance. Now, when I first started researching this area, I did a PhD on slot machine addiction, which I started way back in the mid-1980s. And now I think it's generally accepted that gambling addictions, or rather gambling in its most extreme form, is a genuine addiction, just like other more traditional drug addictions. And if you accept the basic premise that gambling is can be an addictive activity, there is no theoretical reason why things like being addicted to video games or social media and lots of other things that we now have in today's society, you could become addicted to. Now, one of the things I'm most known for is what's called my addiction components model. And I basically have the proposition is that any activity that fulfills these 6 components, I would operationally define as a genuine addictive behavior. So if any behavior features what I call salience, mood modification, tolerance, withdrawal, conflict, and relapse, I would operationalize that behavior as a genuine addictive behavior. And I don't care what the behavior is before I look at it. If I find that any behavior and any person engaging in a behavior fulfills these 6 components, I would operationalize that person as genuinely addicted to that particular activity. So what these things basically mean is salience is this is the single most important thing in my life that I'll do to the neglect of everything else. Even if I'm not actually engaged in behavior, I'm thinking about the next time I'm going to do it. So what we're talking about here is total preoccupation. The next component is mood modification, this idea that we use activities and substances as a way to get high, buzzed up, aroused, excited, or we do it to the exact opposite. We do it to tranquilize, to numb, to escape, to de-stress, to relax. The third component is tolerance, needing more and more of this activity or more and more of this substance to get those same initial mood modifying experiences. The fourth one is withdrawal symptoms. For me, somebody is not genuinely addicted to something if when it's taken away, they don't on a psychological level feel more moody, more irritable, more frustrated, more anxious, or even on a physiological level, they get things like hand sweats, nausea, stomach cramps, etc. The fifth component is the most important one. In what we're talking about here is an activity that's so conflicting in this person's life, it compromises their personal relationships, it compromises their education or occupation, depending on what age they are. And it also, people experience what I call intrapsychic conflict within themselves. They know that they're doing this activity too much. They know they should probably try and cut down and stop, but they feel unable to do so, and they experience a subjective loss of control. The question I always get asked, particularly by the media, is, Mark, what's the difference between healthy excessive enthusiasms and addictions? And for me, it's very simple. Healthy excessive enthusiasms add to life and addictions take away from it. On that very simple rule of thumb, most people are not addicted to the activities that they're even excessively engaged in. And then finally, we've got relapse, the idea that if I've managed to give up this activity for 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, or even 2 years, once we start engaging that activity again, we go straight back into the addictive cycles that we were in before. Now, I also argue, and to be honest, I could literally spend hours and hours talking about this one slide, but my basic proposition is that any addictive behavior that we look at, we have to realize that it's always going to be, in terms of it, the kind of etiology, the acquisition, development, and maintenance of that behavior, it's always going to be an interaction between a person's individual characteristics, their biological and genetic predispositions, their personality factors, attitudes, expectations, beliefs, etc. What we call the structural characteristics, the things that people actually design into their products, in terms of making a gambling product more addictive, or making social media more addictive. What do developers design into their products to make those products more attractive, more engrossing, and in the end, for some people, more addictive? And then we've got what we call the situational characteristics, the things that are out there in the environment, marketing, advertising, where you place the product. So it's got to be an interactive mix of all these things that will determine whether somebody becomes addicted to something. Now, way back in 1995, I wrote a paper simply called Technological Addictions. And I argued in that paper is that technological addictions existed, and I operationally defined them as non-chemical behavioral addictions that involved excessive human-machine interaction, and they featured my 6 core components of addiction. And I said that these technological addictions usually contained inducing and reinforcing features which may actually contribute to the promotion of addictive tendencies. Now, in that particular paper, I only talked about 3 potential technological addictions: slot machine addictions, video game addictions, and television addiction. At that particular time, back in 1995, the internet was literally just coming onto people's radar. And so I didn't actually even mention the internet in that particular paper, but it was actually as a result of writing this paper that I got to thinking, well, the internet can actually, I think, could theoretically be something that's potentially addictive. And that's when I started doing research in this area. Now, one of the things I would mention about any type of online addiction, there are lots and lots of what we call generic risk factors that actually help stimulate, facilitate, and for some people go on to be, a potentially addictive activity in terms of online addictions. And this is things like increased accessibility, increased affordability, high anonymity, increased convenience, disinhibition, escape-like qualities, and social acceptability. I haven't got time to go through all those now. You can ask me when we can open up the discussion. But what I'm saying here is that, most online activities, whether it's online gambling, online gaming, online shopping, social media use, you will find that some of these generic these generic features are factors that make those activities more attractive and engrossing for some people. Now, if we look at, I just want to end this by talking about some of the prevalence figures. I have to say, you have to take some of this with a grain of salt as far as I'm concerned, because I think that some of these, the figures I'm going to talk about now are completely overinflated in terms of genuine addictions by my definition. Okay. If we look at the figures I'm going to present are what are called from meta-analyses. This is where you kind of add all the studies together and you come up with a more realistic estimate of how problematic something, an activity, in this case, internet addiction or gaming addiction, social media addiction, might actually be. So the very first meta-analysis that was published 10 years ago looked at the prevalence figures of 164 studies across 80 different studies. 80 different studies across 31 different countries with just under 90,000 participants. And what they reported, that there was a global prevalence estimate of 6% of people addicted to the internet. Now, if that really was the case, I would expect to see an internet addiction treatment center in every major city across the world. And that is simply not the case. So that 6% to me is not assessing addiction. It might well be assessing, preoccupation. It might be assessing, some problematic behavior. But by my definition, it is not assessing. That's not really a true reflection of genuine addiction. They also found in that particular study is that the prevalence of internet addiction was much higher in the Middle East and much lower in Western Europe. Another study that looked at both internet addiction and what we call internet gaming disorder in 2020, this looked at 113 studies with just under 700,000 people, again across 31 different countries. And they found that they estimated the prevalence rate for internet addiction was just over 7%. And for internet gaming disorder, it was just under 2.5%. Cheng et al. Looking at social media studies. So again, this is another meta-analysis. They looked at 63 studies with just under 35,000 people across 32 different countries. And they found that there was a prevalence rate of 5%. Another study by Vahidi and Zanella in 2019 did a meta-analysis looking at the relationship between social media use and depression. This was across 55 different studies with over 80,000 participants, and they found that there was a small positive significant relationship between self-reported symptoms of depression and social media use. But when they looked at addictive social media use or problematic social media use, that association became far more significant. And in terms of some other studies that have been done, looking at, for instance, gender differences. So Sue and colleagues, they looked at both internet gaming disorder and social media addiction. They looked at 53 studies with just under 83,000 people across 21 different, across 21 countries. What they found was that, so what they found was that there was gender-specific differences. Males were significantly more likely to have gaming disorders. Females were significantly more likely to have a social media disorder. And then finally, what I'll wrap it up with is just talk about gaming. This is something that, again, I've been studying gaming addiction since 1989, a long time I've been studying this. Just talk about two or three studies that have been done. So Famatel, who looked at adolescents only, they just looked at 16 studies that had been done, and they estimated the prevalence rate of internet gaming disorder was just under 5%, with a much higher rate amongst males, 6.8%, versus females, 1.3%. Another study done by Stevens and colleagues, which looked at not just adolescents, but gaming disorder right across all the studies out there to that particular point. They looked at 53 different studies with just under 250,000 participants across 17 different countries. They found they estimated the prevalence rate to be just over 3% for internet gaming disorder. When they teased that out and looked at the most high quality studies, so the studies that had used nationally representative samples, studies that had used very high quality assessment instruments, the prevalence rate actually lowered to just below 2%. But again, like FAM, they found that there was a significantly more likely that males were likely to have a gaming disorder than females, with a ratio of about 2.5 to 1. The final thing I just want to mention is that lots of people talk about typologies of internet addiction. Kimberly Young, who lots of people think published the first paper on internet addiction, but I actually beat her by a month. She came up with a typology back in 1989 and said there were 5 different types of internet addiction. She talks about what she calls cybersexual addictions, people who compulsively use cybersex and cyber porn websites, cyber relationship addictions, people who are overly involved in online relationships. She also talked about net compulsions, particularly people who are obsessively gambling online, gaming online, shopping online. She also talked about information overload. People are, in today's terminology, would be constantly Googling all the time. And then she talked about computer addiction. So she talked about actually people addicted to games like solitaire on the computer, which I argued later wasn't even a type of internet addiction, because you didn't even need the internet for that particular activity. Now, we know, I argued quite strongly that that typology was deeply flawed, that most of these people were not internet addicts. They were using the internet as a medium to fuel other addictions. And the internet was just the place where they engaged in the behavior. And in fact, this might sound quite controversial, is that I've actually argued that people are no more addicted to the internet or no more addicted to the internet and smartphones than alcoholics are addicted to bottles. So that what I'll leave you with, and I do realize this is a summation of 3 decades of research. My perception is that online addictions, they do appear to exist, but it all depends on how you define addiction in the first place. Now, although time spent online does correlate with addiction, I have to really stress is that excessive use does not have to be problematic. And particularly on my research on gaming addictions and social media addictions, I've come across lots of people who use these activities excessively online, and they are quite clearly not addicted by my criteria. It may be the case that the medium of the online medium is more susceptible for some types of individuals, and I would particularly target youth as that particular vulnerable group. And there I'm talking about both adolescents and emerging adults. Most research suggests that internet addictions are specific, so things like internet gaming addiction, online gambling addiction, rather than the internet addiction being more generalized. However, I do leave open the possibility that there may be a tiny minority out there where the internet itself may be addictive to them. And these are the types of people that spend all day, every day online and actually can't function without doing everything online. So I'll leave it there and say thank you very much.
Great. That was Mark. That was definitely I don't know what you called it.
An amphetamine fueled version.
Amphetamine infueled version. Yes. Lots of information here. Before we jump into conversation, I want to take a photo as we usually do of everybody. So if you can turn your cameras on. So I'm going to point out some folks who don't have their cameras on. Tia, Gabriela, Natalie, Naomi, Ahmad, Minwoo, Shi Chi, my mother, who's joining us from Connecticut in the United States. Eric, if you could turn on your cameras, Roxanne as well, who I think is Kennedy's mom. If you could turn on your camera, Iziani, likewise, please turn on your cameras. And I am going to take a photo in, if you could smile on 3. 1, 2, 3, smile. And just one more photo, in case we get some closed eyes, etc., and so forth, or more images on. 1, 2, 3, smile. Fantastic. Amy, glad you're so this is supposed to be family diplomacy. I actually couldn't get it. Whereas the previous dialogues, I was able to either to get my partner's daughter or my father or my partner herself to participate in this dialogue. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get anybody to participate. But I'm glad to see Amy. It looks like you're joining with your mom in Connecticut in the United States. So let's open up the conversation. So feel free to offer your perspective, but also to respond to what others what our experts have been pointing out. So Kazi Bismillah, I'm sure I'm butchering your name, but if you can introduce yourself, where you're coming from, and then go ahead and say what you'd like to say. And please, just as Kazi did, raise your hand electronically. It's very helpful to me to figure out who wants to speak next.
Thank you very much, Paul, for joining and conducting this conference. My name is Kazi Bismillah. It is pronunciated as Kazi Bismillah. I am from Swat. It is a valley in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa from Pakistan. I am from Pakistan, and there is a valley Swat. It is called Swat. It is also called Switzerland of the East. My question from the honorable speaker is that from the age group of 5 to 10, there is a game addiction. And if you prevent the game from the children from age bracket 5 to 10, then they will weep like all mother. So what kind of strategies could be used so that they could love other outdoor activities, study, and other things? Thank you very much.
Do you want me to jump in on this one?
Sure, please do.
Okay, so it's interesting that Denise called her kids digital natives. I mean, I call my 3 children screen agers. They're now all very young adults, but all of them, well, my 2 young sons follow typically the stereotypical being avid gamers. My daughter was more into social media. Now, the issue that's just been raised was a very real one in my family, particularly with my youngest son. So my youngest son, who's now 22, and he is still an avid gamer. He was somebody that, you know, at the age of 7, 8, whenever we basically took his game off him, he would scream, have tantrums, you know, throw what we call a wobbly in the UK. So the picture that you're painting is one that many parents will probably recognize whenever you take away technology from children. Now, my youngest son is called Lucas. He'll probably be embarrassed if he was on the line that I'm talking about him in this way, but he's lucky that he's got 2 parents as psychologists. And one of the things that we started when we realized that these tantrums and, you know, getting actually quite aggressive when we took technology off, in particular when we stopped, literally would just turn his game off. We then started introducing time warnings. So we would say, Lucas, you've got 30 minutes left. Lucas, you've got 15 minutes left. Lucas, 5 minutes left. Lucas, 1 minute left. And then the tantrums were almost zero. Okay. When he knew that, it was time limited and that, there was going to come a point where we were going to turn him off. Honestly, the tantrums went down to almost nothing. But I suppose to take, if you're an adult and you really like doing something and then somebody just stops what you like doing straight away, you'd probably feel frustrated, angry, moody or whatever. And it's about, and I think for younger children, that does take time to think in that technology and what they're doing. And you've got to remember, my son was playing with his other friends online and still does play with his other friends online. And this is the other thing is that, you'd say, Dad, you can't just take me off because I'm playing with Oscar, I'm playing with Joe, we're playing cooperatively here. And we had this more recently when he was about 16, he was a heavy Fortnite player. And again, parents, as a responsible parent, what you have to do, you have to get to learn about the games that your children play. It's not good enough to know that they play games. You have to know what games they're playing, what's in the game, what type of game they're playing. Because I never realized, that Fortnite was actually a cooperative game that in this case, my son was playing along with 3 other people. And that, in fact, he couldn't just stop because he was letting his friends down if he suddenly dropped out of the game. I also had to learn that, in fact, Fortnite was something that actually comes in 20-minute games. Okay, so I couldn't say to my son, even when he was 16, Lucas, your dinner is ready, because if he just started playing Fortnite, he was going to be letting his teams down. So I'd had to shout up, Lucas, dinner is going to be ready in 15 minutes, which was code for don't start playing another game of Fortnite now because your dinner's good, So it's really is about parents communicating with their children, realizing how important this game, this activity is in children's lives. Now, I'm not anti-gaming at all. I myself, when I was my son's age, actually a bit older, when I was about 14, I was playing on my dad's Commodore 64. I was playing Donkey Kong. I do remember spending numbers of hours playing this game. So I know what it was like as a children to play games for lots of hours, but it didn't ruin me. Okay. As I say, it goes back to my point. Excess does not necessarily mean something bad. Another thing I would say is, what did I used to do when I was my children's age at 7 or 8? I used to watch 3 or 4 hours of black and white television every day with my parents. Okay. Now, my children hardly ever watch TV. They might watch a bit of catch-up TV or Netflix, the odd YouTube video, but they don't really watch TV and never have done particularly. My golden rule as a parent was, as long as my children were engaged in their educational activities, their physical educational activities, and I do believe that face-to-face communication is important. And I do want my children to grow up, in healthy peer relationships where they're actually spending some face-to-face time, not just online contact. And as long as they did all the chores that I wanted them to do around the house, I was very relaxed about what they did in their spare time. And my youngest son particularly spent a lot of time playing video games. My youngest son now has gone through university, did very well, but he's still an avid gamer. He still absolutely loves playing his games. It's the most important leisure activity that he's got. I've never tried to stop him, but I have tried to limit him as a parent, as he's grown up. And just to say, as long as he gets that education, physical education, peer interaction, and he engages in what I call, the kind of civil work of, doing his chores around the house or for the community, I'm a happy parent. So that's my very simplistic view, but I do realize there can be some people out there that are genuinely addicted to video games. What I've just said now will not actually cure that particular thing, but I actually do think for the vast majority of social media use and video game use, it does come down to parents being responsible parents. When I get, and I've seen headlines in our national papers here in the UK, 3-year-old addicted to their iPads, or addicted to technology. I'm sorry, no 3-year-old kid can ever be addicted to anything, because you as a parent can literally limit how much your child is spending on those interactive technologies.
Thank you very much. What is the I'm talking about? You talk about good and bad games. The point is that Free Fire, they play game like Free Fire and PUBG, which is about shooting other people. So this kind of games are making children violent, because they are shooting people, they are like these kind of things, and they are so much addictive that they can't spend time without playing games.
Okay, I mean, there's a whole, right, you brought up a whole range of issues here. The first thing, when people say to me, are computer games good or bad? My stock answer is which particular games you're talking about, because you've just mentioned that we do have things like very violent games. There are lots and lots of very good games out there that if my kids do play a mixture of those types of games. Now, I'm somebody that actually, when we look at the video game violence debate, and it's, we could just spend the whole next 3 hours talking about that. What we have to realize actually, although there is some evidence out there that the more video game, violent video games you play, the more likely you are to have problems in terms of your own aggression and violence. There's also research showing that actually people, if you like, are more predisposed towards being violent and aggression, seek out those types of game. So it actually can be very bi-directional. And I don't want to vilify the games, because there are lots of people that play very violent video games and actually have no aggression or violence whatsoever, and actually use that game as a kind of cathartic mechanism. There'll be other psychologists that are far more rigid in terms of their thinking, just saying. Now, the thing is, even though I think the scientific evidence is a bit shaky, did I let my own children play violent video games when they're younger? The answer was no. The point is, as a responsible parent, is that we have age ratings on our games for a reason. Okay. What I did find absolutely shocking, when my son was 12, okay, he came to me and said, "Dad, can I get Grand Theft Auto? Can I get Call of Duty?" And I said, "No." He said, "But Dad, every boy in my class has got the game." And that's what I can't believe, is that parents are willingly, buying 18 plus games for their children. Those age ratings are there for a reason. Okay. Now, obviously, when your children get to 16 or 17, you might become a little bit relaxed. Your children better than anybody else. But there is no way that an 8, 9, 10-year-old children should be playing age-appropriate games. And a lot of that age-appropriate games does revolve around either sex in games, violent content in games, swearing in games. This is not the kinds of things that we want our kids to be brought up in. I do realize that, people say children are growing up quicker than they ever are, but it's all down to responsible parenting to me. There is lots of guidance out there on the internet for parents in terms of both children using social media and for gaming as well. Is that if a parent is willingly letting their children play PUBG, then I'm sorry, that's irresponsible parenting. That's not on the child themselves. If the child turns around and says, "But all my friends play it," well, I'm sorry. Even though, it's like when my daughter went on to Facebook for the first time. Okay, this was many years ago. Of course, my daughter wouldn't be seen dead on Facebook now. But anyway, the point about it then is that she went on below the age of 13, okay, because we thought it was useful for her to stay in contact with all her friends. Okay, we did take the decision then that even though she was only 12 at the time and you should be 13 to be on Facebook at the time, as parents, we took that decision. But I wouldn't, in terms of video games, those age ratings are there for a particular reason. But I agree with you. Games like PUBG, young children shouldn't be playing games like PUBG.
Okay, so I'm going to ask Denise and Bethany if you want to chime in any way. Much appreciate that you guys have been actively participating in the chat and informing the dialogue through the chat, but I'd love to give you some chance to respond. Then we're going to turn to Joe. And beyond gaming addictions, would love to get back to what Denise and Bethany raised about loneliness, which is a kind of somewhat different topic, given this paradox that people are, as Denise pointed out, increasingly connected and yet socially not connecting. So there's this interesting paradox and this loneliness epidemic, particularly in the United States, but I think it's happening in other parts of the wealthy parts of the world. So with that said, Denise and Bethany, your thoughts, and then Joseph, and then anybody else, please raise your hands. We'd love to hear from you, including our interns and our family diplomats who are in on this conversation. Denise and Bethany?
Go ahead, Bethany.
I was distracted reading some of these awesome comments, so I will let you start. There's really interesting responses that I'm getting into. Sorry.
I think the loneliness thing is interesting because it does seem to be a worldwide phenomenon. And the United States is not the highest on the list. We're below average compared to the rest of the world. But I wonder how much is related to the lack of values and meaning that we have in our lives today. That and things that it's like we're afraid to say no to children, and we're afraid to say these are our values. I think it was really important for me to tell my children when they were young, we don't have sex early. We don't have, because that was my value. When you get older, you can have your own values and do what you want. But my value is you should wait, and you should be maybe in a relationship that's permanent. But parents are afraid to talk about these kind of things with their kids. And maybe part of the fear is that they don't know their values themselves. Go ahead, Bethany.
Bethany, any thoughts?
Just broadly, and looking at the comments and the discussions, I just think it's interesting that a lot of what we're talking about really goes beyond social media, and this was touched on in the last presentation. It goes beyond, phones and internet and things like that. It's parenting, and those time warnings are probably particularly important on gaming because of the nature of gaming. But when I take a 3-year-old to the park, those time warnings are so important. And it's that clear communication that parents need to have with their kids, that positive relationship that allows that back and forth conversation, and being able to hear what your kids are saying. These are things that support children even outside of this. And so I think it can be really important because of the nature of computers and things like that. But all of those behaviors are helping us support our children more broadly. And it also then relates to that loneliness, because we need to be able to have that communication, that respectful communication back and forth. And so it's easy to focus on this. So we need to focus on the specific medium. But as people who study parenting, it's kind of the same story in every other setting.
I think a lot of the technology that we've developed it without developing along the lines of ethics and knowing how to use things. So, for example, we learned how to do in vitro fertilization. When that first started, we ended up, implanting 8 eggs in a woman before people start saying, maybe this isn't the right thing to do. And when people first started using phones, I can remember, now all of you guys are young, okay? And Paul is young, but I can remember when you would go to a phone, you would use a phone booth. And it was like you were surrounded, and it was your phone conversation was considered private. When phones came out, people started using phones. I'd be walking across campus and I'd be hearing people saying, yeah, I just found out that I have a sexually transmitted disease. And I'm like, whoa, excuse me, I don't need to hear this. This is private. But now it seems that people are becoming more aware that this is really not appropriate. And so it's like we're starting to come up with courteousness and rules that we didn't have before, which makes me wonder if our new little, what did you call them, Mark?
Sorry, screenagers.
Screenagers, okay, yeah. That they are going to be more aware and better at using technology than their parents.
But all I would say, they have done. My son gave his first PowerPoint presentation to his nursery when he was 4. I think it's great to acquaint children with state-of-the-art technology from a very early age, because that's the workplace they're going to go into when they're later. But it is about teaching them, the good outweighs the bad on all these things. But unfortunately, the bad is what gets most of the media and press publicity. And when it is bad, it can be really bad and totally destroys that person's life and often the family around them as well.
Mm.
And teaching them right from the beginning. At 4, you allowed your child to use technology. I think that's really important, so that they can start learning what your values are and our life's meaning and purposes. I think that's just, that's parenting.
And maybe Denise, your point about this kind of the conversation about values, which I think is really important, perhaps needs to be extended not just within the family, but to in public settings, even before technologies are released or unleashed on the public, that we have conversations about our values as publics, as societies, and the kinds of technologies that we're going to unleash on the public and what impacts they may have, which really doesn't happen. What happens is, it's for-profit search for markets and so on. You introduce the technology with the intent to make lots of money, with no concept of its or little interest in its social consequences, other than to the extent that it can addict people. So there's a broader kind of conversation, I think, that needs to happen in society about values and the ways in which our technologies to some extent undermine or support those values. But anyway,
and just teaching my grandchildren about how corporations are out to make money, and they are addressing children and young adults, and children and young adults need to understand that this is part of what's going on.
Yeah. So Joe has been waiting patiently. So Joe's going to go first. And I'd also like, because this is international dialogue, to take advantage of hearing from perspectives from different parts of the world. So after Joe, I would love to hear from Begum, who's joining us from Turkey. Amy, if your mom, you and your mom are willing to speak, give a family perspective of your own, that would be great. I'll come back to you, but you may want to discuss with your mom, I don't know if she's paying attention currently. Roxanne, who is joining with her daughter, they're on separate screens, but I don't know if Roxanne is paying attention currently, but it would be great to get your perspective. You guys live in Panama. We have somebody who's joining us, Haya, who's joining us from Syria. So we'd love to get your perspective as well. It seems like you've been contributing, and much appreciate you contributing in the Zoom chat. I will be calling on other people, but there are others here, and I want to mention just two of our family diplomats, Juliana from Brazil. I don't know if you have any perspective on this from your vantage point in Brazil, and likewise Nusrat from your vantage point in Bangladesh. So I'm calling on all of you and hoping that you'll raise your hands and be willing to contribute. But I'm not going to force you, but the point is, if you're willing to speak, if you could raise your hand digitally, that would be great. Joe.
Wow. Thank you, Mark, Denise, and Bethany. There's so much, and I don't even know where to begin. But the place I'm drawn to in terms of this conversation is about community and parenting. In my lifetime here in the United States, and I suspect that this may be more than just the United States, community and parenting has become, I think, less trustful, less organic, more fragmented. And a lot of those things can be fueled by the use of the internet and the messages that people are receiving. And once you control that message, I think that's causing a lot of the fragmentation. I've got 8 boys, and I adopted them. The youngest was 12, and the oldest was just weeks away from being 21. So we're really, from my perspective as a parent, I'm talking about kids that didn't have a foundation. And when I say foundation, and I think this is what's happening here, it's in terms of community and parenting, is that there's been a disruption in, I'm going to say healthy identity formation, although identity formation just might be the overall theme here. When we don't have a great foundation to stand upon, and all of those things that you guys have been talking about are missing or disjointed or confusing, and we don't know, say the parents don't know how to sort of lead our kids down those paths, then what's happening from my perspective is that kids are staking their identity on the things that they're hearing and receiving from these very short, non-critical thinking issues that they're being bombarded with. I have a real issue with my kids when they talk about their friends, because they're really not talking, they're talking about people they've never met before. And, you know, my kids are older, so, oh, I want to go to, or I'm going to go to, can you drive me to, I live in Alabama, can you drive me to Kentucky to meet my friend, who is just somebody that they met on the internet? And I have some kids with special needs, and they really have, at least in their heads, bonded, and that I'm always challenging them for this definition of friends. I'm afraid of them being breadcrumbed away by people who are on the internet that are not there for good reasons. And they'll argue like, no, they're by, you know, like you would think that they were born together and they grew up together, and these are people that they don't know. So that, you know, there's a story. We have a holiday in the United States called Halloween, and I remember how that was such a community thing, and everybody would go and we'd run around and we'd collect bags and bags of candy, and it was a fun event. And then somebody started putting razor blades in apples, and that sort of ruined that holiday. And so I've seen a sort of a snowball's effect to that, where people and parents are so unsure, and they're constantly comparing themselves to what their kids are saying. Like Mark said, you know, I tell my kids, I don't care how many people have, I'm old school. Denise, I'm probably older than you are, but like, they know how I feel. And that's the most important thing for me, is that when I am not there, I want them to hear my voice. And my voice is, my messages are hopefully based on morals and values. And when we have a community that's not sure of what their morals and values are, we don't, you know, it used to be that there was a line, this was right and this was wrong, and we don't have that anymore at all. So and then I'll just end with one other story. I was a longtime educator, and I used to do parenting classes, and we would talk about the internet and how the things that were happening. We had a police officer come in, and I can't tell you how many parents, when I said you need to have a connection with your child, would say, well, they have a cell phone. And I would say, that is how you keep in contact with your child. That is not a connection to your child. And so I think I agree wholeheartedly with Denise if she is saying that we need to pay attention to the things that nourish families, which is community and some more common sort of parenting strategy. And then all this other stuff, then you can infuse all those messages with some certainty. So anyway, I could talk about this for hours, but I'm going to give other people time to talk.
Great. And we've only got, time flies. We've only got about 20 minutes, a little less than 20 minutes left. Begum from Turkey.
Thank you all for the great presentations. And my question is for Dr. Mark. I'm really curious about how was the internet addiction back in late 1990s, because even I think so Facebook was launched in 2016 or 17, but in 1990s even people didn't have like many people didn't use mobile phones. So what kind of addiction behaviors were there?
Okay,
Online addiction.
that's very simple for me to answer. So, in fact, people didn't contact me then by email. They used to contact me by snail mail, and all the letters I got from parents were, because you got to remember, back in from 1995 to maybe early 2000s, people used to have a modem and they were paying by the minute for internet use. Okay, so all the letters I used to get was, my child has racked up telephone bills of $3,000, huge telephone bills because they were spending all their time online. And that was what I was getting contacted about because it was the amount of money that was being spent. Parents couldn't afford that amount of money. Now, of course, I don't get any contact. I don't get any contact from parents about the amount of money. It's about the amount of time that they are spending away from their education, away from friends. So if you like internet addictions, and I say, I don't even like using the word internet addiction now, because for me, it's about addictions on the internet, not addictions to the internet. But absolutely, those first 5 years that I studied internet addiction as it was then, the main problematic consequence of spending lots of time online was parents getting into huge amounts of debt, which we just don't see now at all. So very, very different then from what it is now.
Thanks, Mark. Amy and Mom, whose name I don't know, from joining us from Connecticut in the USA. Your thoughts?
Hi, I'm Heidi. I'm Mom. Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
2 things come to mind. One is raising my daughters. I would always try to remember and reflect, oh, my childhood, when I was a kid, we did this, we did this. Yet my daughter's childhood is their childhood, and trying to make theirs to be mine was never going to fit. So their childhood is their childhood, and we did our best to, they're still children, but it's just different times. So, and then the other perspective I'd like to present is I'm a school nurse in a high school. And I see kids sitting together, staring at their phones. Lunch is noisy. It is definitely a noisy time, but I wonder how much, if everybody was talking instead of staring at their phones, how different things would be. And the other thing that comes to mind is I try so hard to convince the high school kids when they come to my school nurse office that they're, I don't feel good. And I try to educate them and basically convince them they're fine and they're going to be okay and they can go back to class. However, they have their cell phones and they have this constant connection, and they text their parents all day, and eventually the parents will come pick them up. And like, it's so frustrating because I'm trying to teach these children how to be resilient. We're trying to raise young adults, yet a parent constantly gets texts, I don't feel good. Well, a cold is miserable. Of course you're not going to feel good. Do you have to go home? No, but the parents come, and it repeats over and over again. There's a lack of resiliency and grit is what I see in my high school students. Thank you for listening.
Yeah, you're interesting. By the way, I'm reading a book by Jean Twenge, who I believe is a psychologist, called iGen, and it's about this generation born between roughly 1995 and 2012. Some of you are in that generation that were essentially raised with cell phones, which has had massive impacts on our lives. Fascinating work, in part because it's based on national surveys in the United States, and it's kind of comparing different generations. But it shows, as Denise was pointing out, this kind of increase in fragility, as you were indicating, Heidi, but also kind of delayed, not accelerated onset of adulthood, but delayed onset of adulthood. As a result of some of these, the onset of the internet, but also just different parenting practices. So I would love to hear in the few minutes we have remaining from people in Latin America, in Brazil, excuse me. So I'm thinking, Juliana, if you're willing to share, but also in Africa, and Asia here. And so I don't know if Sichi is still with us because it's quite late her time, but she's in China. I don't, or I think she is. Because I think that's Gladys's iPhone is actually her, but I'm not sure about that. But in any case, Juliana, do you want to share your perspective from Brazil? Oh, we can barely hear you. Do you want to take your, if you have headphones on, take them off?
Oh yeah.
Because that's
So now,
okay. Yeah, now we can hear you better.
anybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I didn't know indeed that Brazil, it was in the second place in the ranking of addiction. And when I think about myself. I put a notification to stop use more like 2 hours a day. And as I saw on internet right now, we Brazilians spend like 90 hours and a half per day. So it is scaring me because it affects our mental health. And I really want to focus, not be part of this all these peoples that are addicted, and it's my goal, one of my goals, and not be part of all these people that are addicted.
And as far as I know, if I recall correctly, the Brazil was high not in addiction, but rather in loneliness, if I saw that correctly, Denise.
Yes, lonely too.
Yeah. Isiana, Anthony, if you can tell us where you're joining us from, what city and what country, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes. What city and
Okay.
country are you joining us from?
Okay, I'm joining from Nigeria. Yes, I heard what you people have said, both the speakers, they have done well. About the internet addiction is one of the most challenges we are facing here, because I work at university here, and I'm seeing many students who have been every day, every night operating their phone without reading, and it became a lot of challenges to us. And that made them that when they wrote the exam, found out that some of them will fail some of our questions we set for them. And it becomes a lot of serious matter, knowing that some parents are not even care about their children, because right now, a parent is supposed to allow their children from 1 year to 17 years below to meditate on their reading, on the exercise book, and the homework given them to the school. But some parents are also buying all this, their computer and internet, leave it open for their children to be creating. I even find out that a little guy of 10 years saw him with an Android phone, and I asked him, what are you doing with it? He said that their parents bought it for him. I need to seize the phone and send it back to their parents and ask them not to give the boy the phone again. A lot of things normally exist in a mobile phone. Just yesterday, I saw some of his children from 16 years dancing naked in our Facebook to attract customers. And this is not a good idea. And their parents will be also watching the same thing and praising their children. Is not good. And we need to take care of our children. Like for me, I grew up from a family, and I know when I started using my phone, and when I'm after 18 years, I started operating my phone. And that is a very good idea. It teaches me a lot of things, because children, their brain from 18 years, 17 years below, their brain are not much good idea for them to be using phone, because a lot of things may exist. Some of them will be using phone in the night, watching pornography in the absence of their family, and this will lead them to another different type of behavior. So it's very essential that our parents should look into their children's most important thing. As a family matter, we look into our children. For quite a lot right now, I'm still single, but I'm seeing a lot of things that are happening within these institutions, and I have to call up students and address them, so that there will be a positive impact in the life of our living. Thank you.
Iziana, thank you for your perspective. It sounds like it's really the cell phones have become problematic in various ways for both students and kids and within the family context. Nusrat from Bangladesh.
Hello. Sorry, I can't open my camera. It's because our connection isn't stable yet. It's because of the recent cyclone. Yeah. So the thing is, like, I would say, like, here it's the biggest problem. Like that we have all sort of addiction. I had seen like the 5 types of addiction. So we have, I would say, like, we have all types of addiction here. And the kids often distracted from their parents, from their neighbors, from their relatives, because they are too much addicted on phone and they don't like to socialize with anyone. And there's some particular incident that happened. It's like some of the children from the lower class family, and they just want the specific phone, like I want iPhone from my family. And when they can't just bear the cost of the iPhone, and that moment, the kids and the children, they just even commit the suicide. And this is the most common, I would say, like incident that we can often see in the newspaper and media. And the another thing, I think this is the biggest problem, which is, I know this term, and this term is called sharenting. And sharenting means like when the kid just born and the parents started to share their personal information, personal moment, and everything in the social media without the consent of the kids. Because kids that moment, they don't know. They can't talk, they can't give the permission to their parents that whether I want or not. And they just make it as part of the content of the social media. And this is the biggest problem. Almost all the parents you can see like here, and they just capture the moment of their newborn babies. And when they just grow up and they're just capturing their all the moments and they share the personal thing. And even though the kids want or not, because that moment kids don't even talk. So they say like, yeah, they're just content creators while they're just using their kids. So this is the biggest problem. And you can see like lots of content creators and they're still famous just because of their kids. And from that, I think from as they're just doing this sort of activities, I think that's the reason the kids are introduced with the smartphone when there's very little. So I think from that moment, they are just getting addicted to the smartphone and they use a lot of screen times. And this is, I don't know, I haven't seen any other countries like that. And almost all the parents, especially those who are housewives and those who are not working women, and they just stay at home and doing this sort of activities. And they earn a lot of money from the Facebook, from YouTube and any other platform. So this is a sort of, you can say like the business, and while it's the part of mobile addiction or the screen addiction. So yeah, and I guess this is the biggest problem nowadays. And the male, they even don't like this sort of activities and they can't even prevent the woman to do this sort of things. So yeah, and there are lots of things. I think maybe we don't have much time to speak. So but I think these are the main problems.
Nusrat, thank you for that. I remember Nusrat sharing I'm going to mute you just because there's a reverberation. But I remember you sharing, I think, an article among our family diplomats of, an extreme case where a Bangladeshi child committed suicide because their phone was taken away, I believe, if I remember correctly. Mulba is joining us from Liberia. If you could speak briefly, because we're at the tail end of our discussion, but go ahead, Mulba from Liberia in Africa.
Okay. Am I audible, please?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me say good afternoon from Liberia. With regards to the topic on our discussion, I actually wanted to make a little contribution, and it is actually from a saying that was observed just yesterday, and then today I tried on like privately visiting the person off the social media to be able to like advise them on an issue that I think has affected a lot. Here is it, in Liberia, almost everyone is free to visit the internet. And almost every child, especially between 10 to 15 years old, have smartphones. So, but they feel more attracted to the social media, and sometimes they go there to learn a lot of things. Both the positive side and the negative side. Here's the negative side, right? Some of them actually go there to witness like pornographies, but some of them are also using their phones, especially on the social media, to be able to do some assignments. And we're interested to know there is this family that is very closer to where I was born. So as we speak, I'm not currently in the nation's capital. I'm still in Liberia, but I'm currently in my hometown. So I actually came here like 6 months ago now. So I met this person who is always like posting on the social media her nakedness. She will like do her photo just in like pants, just short things, then post them on Facebook. So I tried to like visit her to see how we could be able to talk about it. We're interested to know. She made me to understand that her parents like her as she is. And I was like, yeah, it's okay. You may want to post whatever you want to do or dress anyhow you want to dress, but can you please maybe reduce these kind of dress codes being posted on the social media, because almost everyone is watching, and most times when these things happen, most parents outside of the social media who get this information think, and they will begin to like sit and gossip like this child is not actually from home. In other words, you do not actually have parents who are like guarding you. So I just wanted to make reference to this. The internet is actually a kind of good thing, but it's also affecting a lot of us, especially in Liberia and West Africa. So I would recommend as it used to be, but again, it's also on the other side. Parents were buying phones, even the SIM cards for their children, and there'll be a restriction, what kind of a website to visit and which one not to visit. So most times if you purchase your phone, you have to go through these programs and it will ask you, are you an adult? Are you below 18? And all of these questions, you have to answer them. But we're interested to know also the parents will hold these phones and attest to everything that yes, they are above 18 after programming the entire phone, give it back to the children. So they are still being exposed to a lot of violence on the internet, like pornography, like we're talking about now, which we already know has a lot of effects on even the minds. So, I just wanted to make this 2 points, and I will actually stop it because of time. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you so much to everyone. Thank you.
Mulba, thank you for your perspective. It's, to kind of wrap things up, what's fascinating is, the cell phones and the internet are all over the place, right? In lower income and higher income countries, and they're having massive impacts in so many different ways. It's not just addictions, but a whole variety of other issues, including kind of this. Suddenly, I'm reminded of what Joe Tolles was saying about the ways in which his kids are connected to people, and they want to meet people they've never met before, and they develop these strong bonds, for better or worse. In some cases, they're online predators. In other cases, like my niece, she met her her fiance online, and they met initially, and they were in different states in the United States, and they met online and so on. So clearly, to go back to, I think, what Denise pointed out, the technology itself it can be viewed as some sort of a neutral instrument that can be used for good and bad, and it depends in part on, as Denise pointed out, our values and the kind of values we assert, and to try to organize not just our family lives, but the broader environment in which our families are based. So I want to thank our speakers. So Denise and Bethany joining us from Arizona, and Mark joining us from England. And thank you all for joining us and giving us your perspectives. We didn't get to hear from absolutely everybody, but I really appreciate having heard from a variety of perspectives across the world. So this completes the the series on security issues impacting families. For our family diplomats, we're over the next several months from July until November, we will be having monthly meetings in which it's going to be very much about learning from each other and kind of developing our expertise on these and our learning on these big issues that are impacting families, namely war, poverty, climate change, gender-based violence, and the internet. Those are the kinds of issues that we're going to be wrestling with. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your time, and see you. I hope to see you soon. Bye.
Bye.